Yes, so almost good afternoon to everybody. My name is Susa Niiranen and I'm a researcher at the Stockholm Resilience Centre, Stockholm University in Sweden. And in Mission Atlantic, I have been co-leading the risk assessment work package together with Saskia, Otto, and also been working with many of you Mission Atlantic partners in this work and risk assessment. So the talk today is going to be about using multiple evidence in assessing the risks and trade-offs in ocean use under changing climate. And this is something that has stuck with me the recent years because me coming from Stockholm Resilience Centre, we do a lot of work with stakeholders, a lot of work nowadays actually more on the qualitative side. And then we have some people like me used to be before we did the quantitative side work. But even at our place, we hardly ever discuss how to combine these two in a meaningful way. And I think that's where we should be going and discussing. So why risk assessment in the oceans? Why particularly now? So the ocean has been used for, I think, 100 years at least, mainly for fishing. But then during the past 20 years, something called the blue acceleration has taken place. And this is really quite recent. If you see all of these graphs here, it's different ocean sectors. And you see that there is this kind of really, really rapid increase 20 years ago, approximately. So a lot is happening, and a lot is happening now. And a lot of that is new, that we don't really have necessarily data for or understanding for. Then, at the same time, these ocean sectors that we saw increasing very rapidly, they do interact both with each other, the ecosystem, as well as larger scale dynamics, forming this kind of complex adaptive systems, social ecological systems we talk about often. And what you see here is also that we should focus on not only the things that happen at our case study level, it could be increases in seawater temperature, could be nutrient inflows, could be diseases, for example, like we heard today, but we should also care what happens at other levels, for example, the global economy, governance, as well as, for example, technology development, which is a big thing, for example, for fisheries. And this is an example from pre-Mission Atlantic times from colleague Debbi Pedreschi, Celtic Sea assessment of the scoping all the risks related to sectors, pressures, and ecosystem components. And already when we saw this, you can imagine that even when we work at the case study level at Mission Atlantic, 7 different case studies presented here, things are pretty complex. And we are not talking about individual actors. We are talking about sectors. So it's still quite kind of clustered together. So we did know when we started the Mission Atlantic project that it really is necessary to address multiple risk chains and their interactions. And that's what we've been trying to do, both at the case study level and a broader scale. So risk assessment then, it really is about quantifying the probability of undesirable events and their consequences. Another definition could be that we qualitatively or quantitatively determine risk to important ecosystem components, given change in ecosystem pressure or management actions. And this is broadly what we also follow in the Mission Atlantic. And it has a really special part in the IEA also. So it comes after the scoping and indicators in our IE loop. And optimally, we tailor this kind of risk assessment for a certain well-specified management need. And this you've seen already in the case study presentations, which have been great in telling us what are the specific issues in those cases and what you should tackle exactly in those places. So then, if we talk about different types of knowledge, there's a concept called multiple evidence base. And this is really an approach where diverse knowledge systems, they form an enriched picture of the questions we research. And often it kind of leans on this co-production of knowledge. And we do that in the Mission Atlantic, for example, with the case stakeholders. And the idea here is, it's actually really simple, but I think it's brilliant. So on the orange hand side or here, we have things like social science, we have natural science, we have economics, for example. And that feeds into this enriched picture, together with traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, for example, and local knowledge. And the idea really is that we bring it together and we get a better idea what's happening in the system. So we use everything we have, all the knowledge we have, to get a better grasp of what's actually going on. And this is really, nowadays it's quite often applied approach when we work with sustainability challenges, natural resource use, for example, in local context. But I think due to the complexity of the social ecological systems that we tackle, also in the Mission Atlantic, also the limitations in data that we have, it really is necessary to harvest all the information from both of these sides to tackle our questions. So this was briefly mentioned by Kelly already, so I'm not going into it so much, but in Mission Atlantic we did adopt this hierarchical risk assessment approach, and it follows quite nicely the Holzman approach presented here. We tried to stick to it, actually, quite literally. So what it means that we did really go from the more kind of looking into, we never looked into the single sector as such, but at the beginning we really didn't look so much into the interactions either, I think. So we did really go towards this top corner here, where we really are looking into multiple pressures, multiple subjects, looking how they interact with each other, and then try to evaluate the outcome quantitatively. So that's where we aim at with this. And we did go from the rapid screening with this ODEM approach together with our stakeholders to identify the key issues that we should tackle into the really the quantitative assessment of the trade-offs that you saw the example from Kelly, for example, this morning. So from simple to more complex, from qualitative to quantitative, that's what we followed quite religiously, I would say. And this is in practice the roadmap that we created for ourselves. So we had the scoping. This is the ODEM. You've seen many of these, of the key risks of sectors, pressures, ecosystem components. We did this across, or the case studies did it, across all seven of them, using literature, prior knowledge, as well as stakeholder interaction in several workshops. And after that, we took two different kind of approaches. So the one is the quantitative risk assessment that was individually tailored for each case. And you've seen examples of this today. You had the climate and fisheries from Kelly's work combined with the oil exploration. You saw Mamadou working with the fisheries and the oil interface as well. We have the Azores focusing on the marine heat waves. That turned out to be very important there. And that's very important because we really need to produce risk assessments that tackle the questions that are asked. But then there's the other part of the more comparative assessment that we've been also compiling at the same time on the side, where we try to have results that we can apply across the case studies. And both of them we do study using Bayesian belief networks. I think most of the case studies did apply that methodology, and that we also do when we study the different case studies using this more general framework or structure. So then these are the preliminary results of scoping using the ODEM approach, but this is now combining results from every case study. So we're looking at averages. It may not exactly look like it did in South Africa or in the Azores, but this is the kind of average picture. And this is really the ODEM phase 1 results. And here we saw that of the sectors, it was the fishing, it was agriculture, and it was shipping that emerged as the important risk sectors. Here we should note that ODEM does not explicitly include climate stressors, and that's also something that Ines pointed out. And we do introduce them back again when we do the next step of the risk assessment. So we use Bayesian belief networks for this part of the work, and this is now the phase 2, where we try to get into the interactions in a bit more quantitative manner. These are probabilistic graphical network models. They represent variables and their conditional dependencies using directed acyclic graphs. Clear limitation here is that we can't do feedbacks. So that's one of the downsides of this approach. We can try to go around that, and I can tell you how we've done it a bit later on. They can combine prior knowledge and observed data to update beliefs through Bayesian interference. This is really important for the IEA because we do get updated knowledge all the time. They can handle uncertainty, making them useful for decision making, also under incomplete or noisy information. And I think this is almost always the case with the social ecological systems. They can also support causal reasoning, and this basically means that we can create what-if scenarios, like most of the models can, and explore, for example, the effects of management interventions. And what is really key from the point of my talk, and what we're trying to do, is that they can use multiple evidence, so different types of data, both quantitative and qualitative. The probabilistic results, they are easy to interpret and communicate within risk context. So it may not be able to do all the things that the models can do, some very sophisticated models also in the Mission Atlantic, but also the results of this kind of approach, they are quite easy to communicate. So partially you should think about it as a communication tool as well. And these kind of models, they've been more increasingly used as a risk assessment tool by the recent years. So there really has been an increase in the use of them. But what I do still notice, it's not so often that you use in these both the quantitative and qualitative data that they would talk with each other. It's often still that you do one based on expert knowledge, or you do one based on wealth of data, that you have time series data. So then, in these kind of multisectoral Bayesian belief network models that we've been working on with the Mission Atlantic, we at least attempted to bring different streams of evidence together. And namely, mainly, if we start here, we have the sectors we look into: fishing, shipping, and climate and nutrients. We have pressures caused by all of them, and we have the ecosystem components. And these come largely from the ODIM as well as our systems understanding. What I like how we've done here, and also what Kelly showed, is that we can include the last component, which is ecosystem services. So here we're looking into food provisioning in a sustainable sense of it. We're looking at cultural ecosystem services, so iconic species. And we are looking into habitat quality. If we come to the data, so how we have used data so far is that we use input from food web models like Strath End-to-End and the EcoPath with EcoSim, different model, different cases, to describe the fishing part of things, as well as the climate effect on a lot of the biology, the fish stocks, low trophic levels, mammals also. How we use the models here, it's not, the models are run prior, so we are kind of emulating the results. So that's how you should understand the use of these results. And we do that because we want to incorporate the fisheries side together with then, for example, shipping. So the idea is not that we redo the work, but it's kind of emulating the results. And that's also one way how we can get out of this, that because we can't describe the feedback loops using the Bayesian belief network models. But the models that we use the input from, they can do that. So we're kind of incorporating that information in the BBNs. Shipping, largely we had to parameterize using expert knowledge. Sarina has been doing quite a lot of work here. She's here and going to talk about the oil and gas sector in South Africa later on. And also we've used literature and the ODIM scoring to get information on that. And then we had Nemo-Ursum and the GAM niche models that we would include in the climate and nutrient side of things. So we really tried to put together evidence from across the entire project. This is the simplified version of the model that we have come up with now, with testing with the exact data as well. So there are the three sectors. It's the climate and nutrients, fishing, and shipping that we look into. We have the pressures, that are the blue ones, originating from each of the sectors. We have ecosystem components, and we have the ecosystem services. And here, I don't have the habitat in this version yet, but there's the iconic ecosystem services, forming of the birds and marine mammals. There's the fisheries catch, but now we take into account both the catch and the biomass into that. And then we have it's the demersal and it's the planktivorous fish catch currently. And what are actually the most trickiest parts here are the nodes where you go from, where you have, for example, pressures that are caused by two sectors. So you get information from different sources. For example, the litter from shipping and the litter from fishing. We need to then parameterize what is actually the relationship between the two. So how much do we get from shipping in comparison to the fishing, for example? The same goes when we look into for example, the birds. They are affected, no, that's not bad. That's not a good choice. It's the marine mammals. It's affected both by the collision rate and the bycatch and climate. So information, once again, coming from different sources. And these are the tricky parts that we need to get right. And then it's just a brief example of how the shipping part looks like currently. And I'm not telling you which model it is, which case study you may try to guess. But these are derived based on the ODIM results. So what you have here, we haven't chosen any scenarios. So it's equal probability that it's either low, intermediate, or high pressure of shipping. Here we have chosen high pressure. And how the pressure has been classified is that Sarina has been going through the intensity maps of fishing in these regions, and we scale the pressure to that. But if you see, we have between the high level and where we haven't chosen a scenario, we see based on the ODIM scoring that there's a clear effect on, for example, the risk of high level of noise, contaminants, as well as litter, for example, originating from shipping. But what we don't see is actually very big effect on the marine mammal biomass. And this, of course, we need to look into these kind of things in more detail, because, of course, marine mammals, when we couple it together with the fisheries part of the model, they are probably mainly affected by other dynamics than the collisions. The next step that we are going to be incorporating is we would like to have species-specific component that will account for climate effects on the size of suitable habitats for key commercial species. Here we have discussed with Guillem and Mireia earlier to include some of the GAM niche model results. And also I heard that Júlia was just with you, so we will speak with her as well. But the idea here is that we could include a component of a certain key species and how that's affected by climate, for example. And why we want to do that is that it's often the species that the stakeholders are asking for. They're not asking for what's the biomass of demersal fish in total or the planktivorous fish in total. So then something is saying in Danish on my screen. Yes or no? Okay.
Where is it?
Here.
This one.
I can continue while let's see if something explodes. So something that we learned, and it's still work in process. We are going through the Strath end-to-end data, and with the preliminary data we got data in, we had to change the structure so it works and these kind of things. So it's really iterative process. But there are some things that I can say already now that did maybe surprise me a bit, and we did learn. So first of all, combining numerical data and expert knowledge is not trivial. Now I understand why it's not so standardly done. I understand why I don't speak necessarily with the qualitative guys at my work so much. I should. But when building these BBNs, we need to test for different approaches. So we really need the data, and then we test if the structure works, and then sometimes we need to take into the expert knowledge, because otherwise we don't make things to communicate. And there's almost always, I would say, it's a mismatch of some sort with these different types of data. And this has to be recognized. It is going to be there, I think. And particularly when looking into these cumulative nonlinear impacts, and also to the intersections of different data types. And there, so far, I would say, it's really the expert knowledge that can link these different data types in these nodes. One important thing is that I didn't think of it before, because I thought very naively that we should use quantitative data whenever we have, and that's the best data we have. And then I spoke to another person who does these as a profession, also I would say nowadays, is that she said, yeah, but once you use expert knowledge, you really need to trust in that knowledge. Otherwise, there's no use in using that. And I think that's something that really hit hard with me, and I try to keep it with me as well. And then lastly, the outcome should always be validated by experts and data where available. So in short, you remember this one, things are super complex and there's so many things we need to take into account. You look into our Atlantic cases, you have this kind of spaghetti, which is quite complex, and it's still simplification of what it is in real life. And we have this figure. So we know that things are changing very fast, and we don't have very good data for many of these sectors yet available, because it's relatively short time span we've experienced that. So even if it's very challenging, and it's probably going to keep me busy for years, I think it's really time that we put a lot of effort on this. We really need to get this working, because otherwise we don't have the time to only look for the perfect time series. We need to use all the evidence that we have available. And I want to stop with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Susa. I think we have time for a few questions and also get ready for more general questions after this.
I try to use all the time, but you know.
There is always time. Questions? Yeah, Ken?
I wanted to know about the shipping. Do you include fishing vessels as part of that? I mean, there must be hundreds of thousands of fishing vessels.
We didn't. So for this one, we didn't include the fishing vessels, per se.
So is that something you'd want to include, or you think it's not having an effect as the larger vessels are?
So partially the shipping vessels, they are in the fishing pressure when we go from the fishing to the litter, for example. So that impact we have, but it comes directly from the fishing effort and fishing activity. So, but otherwise, currently it's not in. Potentially we should have it in. But that's also something I think we need to speak with the case studies with how they perceive the shipping effect of fishing.
Yeah, hey.
First you.
Okay, thank you. So Liz Linda Jørgensen from Institute of Marine Research in Norway, Tromsø. Stakeholder involvement, complex thing and difficult to approach. Do we see that we could come up with any instructions or guidelines on when and where to include these stakeholders? We hear someone is bringing them in the end of a process, others who try to put them in the beginning in order to structure. You probably also showed that along the way they need to be pulled in. Where is the right time to include them, or should they simply just be pulled with us all the way?
So first of all, I need to now give credit where credit belongs to. So it was the case studies who in the Mission Atlantic really did the interaction with the stakeholders. So from that perspective, I think it's probably somebody else who's better to answer that question. And I actually hope that Debbi would be here now also, because she's done this a lot for a long time. From other experience that we have had, I think it's very critical we have the stakeholders with us when we plan the project from that stage. Because otherwise it's often difficult to engage afterwards. And we don't necessarily know which way to focus, like that we do very relevant things from the beginning. But it's not easy, because there's always, you are so busy writing the proposal, and then it's not easy to get people engaged in that stage. So, but I would also say it's probably depends a bit what's your end goal. So for some things, we have another project on Antarctica now ongoing, and we have different types of workshops, and we do realize that there are certain questions that we need, for example, fishing industry to participate, and then we've reached out at that stage. And it works okay, but not optimal, I would say. I don't think I gave you a good answer.
Dave?
So I'm going to try and feebly replace Debbi, who can be here. So in answer to Ken, the the shipping, we spent a lot of time wrangling over where fishing vessels ships, and therefore included in shipping. But actually, a lot of the pressures they introduce are the same as the shipping ones. You know, obviously the noise, obviously the litter, obviously the contaminants. So they are explicitly in there. They're producing those pressures, but they're not encapsulated with all the other ships. But they're not absent. That's the key point. I'd like to visit the stakeholder thing as well. I've had several stand-up fights with Phil Levin about this. He always said we should have the stakeholders in from day one. I'm never sure what day one is, because I think, it'd be nice to have a project. I'll go and talk to 200 stakeholders. And I've always felt you have to go to stakeholders with something which you've thought about and formulated. So you can't bring them in at stage one. You have to bring them in at stage 2 or 3. And I think that works well. I think showing them it afterwards is a waste of time. They'll say, why didn't you ask us about that? Because that's stupid. So I think, and the key thing that Susa's hit on, and I always hoped this would come out, is that if you want to move fast, and we have to move fast, you need to be able to sensibly use stakeholder knowledge and that famous phrase, expert judgment. Because if we don't do that, we'll be sitting around 20 years later in a burning planet and saying, we've got a nice time series now, we can tell you what's happening. And that's really a worry for me. I was talking to my ex-colleagues from Ireland outside about 20 minutes ago, and they were telling me they're now being asked about stuff for next year. They want to know what data collection should they collect next year. And the answer is expert judgment, not go out and spend a hell of a lot of money on the first point in a time series that will help you in a decade. So your work has been critical to show that. No question. It's a comment.
You need some time there.
Sorry?
You want to comment or you need?
No, I agree. It's good.
Okay. Easy to agree. Martin?
Martin is all about time series, I know.
Nah. So I'm really curious about it, and I love this idea to try to bring together quantitative and qualitative. And took to heart what you mentioned, that we need to trust an expert judgment as being the experts in that case. I just wanted, in the instance where you have actually a mix of both, and sometimes you can actually have overlapping information coming from, have you tried to assess to what degree a Bayesian belief network set up purely on the basis of expert judgment? How does that mesh together, match with the instances where you have quantitative models running behind that and populating some of these conditional probability tables? Maybe that could be one way of, at least for some of those nodes where you can have information coming from both, you could see, do they harmonize in some way, or do they just completely shoot off in different directions? Maybe that could be a first attempt to get some clarity.
Yeah, we've discussed that actually. So that we would do the comparison between the purely expert knowledge and then where we have the evidence available. Haven't done it yet, but I think it's something we need to look into. So
I'm glad that's in the pipeline. And another thing, that in the event where we are lucky to have responses from many different stakeholders, there'd be a range of outcomes reflecting the degree of certainty, uncertainty. So I think that's also something that one can make use of. We have 100 experts scoring, and they just all the answers tend to go in one direction. There's a lot of certainty in that, I would imagine. So I think we can also benefit from that individual-based scorings, and then.
We had a work plan around that actually with Saskia's PhD student Hélène, who's unfortunately, I don't think she's here now. So we had planned actually to take that route and study the uncertainty aspect and also how it plans. That's why I also like the one with Ines showed this vulnerability matrix, which I thought was really nice. And we had a bit of a similar type of idea also to have the uncertainty included and looking into the components that affect most also the output of these models. So some kind of sensitivity analysis linked to this uncertainty of the knowledge and looking at the different corners then. So
cool.
There's a lot to do.
There's a lot to do. Keep us busy.
And just because we are talking about uncertainties, I've seen, and that's more a general question, not only for you, but also for the other speakers. I've seen that many come up with the underwater noise as a major pressure and element for the ecosystem. And my question is about how much do we know about it? Because noise is so much diverse. I mean, it could be noise doing some operation that lasts for hours to days, and others that can last very little, but maybe more frequent. And what's the perception in terms of how much do we know in terms of the impact of noise in general in the ecosystem? Apart, I mean, the mammals, maybe we have some documentation about that. But what about the rest of the ecosystem? Or when you do your risk assessment, most of this impact is going into mammals only, or what?
So now, for example, because we didn't have that evidence, so there's a couple of really good reviews that we have gone through on noise that we've used, but we, for example, didn't have the link going from the noise to the marine mammals because that was too uncertain. So we can show what is the risk that we have high noise, but it was not linked to the marine mammal biomass, for example.
Where is it linked to then? What's the? I mean, if you have
So
high
it's
noise,
going to
what's the
show
risk?
you. So it's more of going to show you. It's an indicator of pressure that's present under a certain combination of sectors, and then you will get. So it's kind of it indicates you that the stressor is there, the risk is there, but the effect is not modeled.
Okay.
So it can So it gives you the information or kind of red flag, but that this is there. But
Dave, down there.
Yeah, I think what's happening there is, and this is probably a weakness of the ODEM, is that when you get something that's there all the time and it's everywhere and it's at a particular level of intensity, it tends to be amplified. It's that effect of being everywhere all the time that makes it a high level pressure, and it's not then that then does not translate through to the sectors. It affects every sector, but you don't quite know how, and it's not at a high level. But because it's everywhere all the time, it just gets lifted much higher. And it doesn't generally come through as a specific one for a particular ecosystem component. But these are artifacts of an attempt to do an analysis that covers everything to an extent.
And we do a bit of work on wind, offshore wind currently, and there the noise is one of the big issues also. So I would be surprised if there wouldn't be more results coming out on that.